Hi, my name is James, and I'd like to talk about engagements during combat while playing the One Ring Role-Playing Game. All right, let's get right to it. Okay, what we're looking at here is an engagement scenario, and let's just say that these three wooden pieces, these three wooden discs, represent the player heroes. Okay, player hero 1, 2, and 3. And these three wooden discs represent our adversaries, number 13, 14, and 15. Okay, and they've come across each other. And we've already decided about surprise attacks, so ambushes have already been resolved. The number of ranged volleys has already been determined, and initiative, of course, has already been determined. Now we're at the portion of the combat where we need to go to close combat and decide how these two sides are going to engage each other. All right, so there's a very important rule to deciding how they engage each other, and it involves counting the number of player heroes and the number of adversaries, okay? Because this determines who gets to decide the actual engagements. Will it be the player heroes deciding what enemies they want to attack, or will it be the lore master who decides what enemies attack which player heroes? And it's a very simple rule. If there are an equal amount of player heroes and adversaries, then it'll be the player heroes who'll decide. Or if there's more player heroes than enemies, the player heroes will decide the engagement. But if there are more enemies than player heroes, then it'll be the lore master who will decide which player heroes to engage with which enemies. And this can become very important because number 13 could be an orc guard, number 14 could be an orc soldier, and number 15 could be a great orc. And it might matter to the player heroes who this great orc is going to be engaged with. So whether they get to decide or the lore master gets to decide. Also, there's a rule regarding which stances, which is the first thing that the player heroes are going to need to do in an engagement. At the top of the round, the first thing they do is choose a stance. And what's important to know is whether or not the player heroes are going to be able to choose a rearward stance. If anyone can stand back and fire with a bow in this engagement. The rule is that there has to be at least two player heroes in a forward or a close combat stance for one player hero to choose a rearward stance. And the number of adversaries cannot be more than twice the number of companions. And if the number of adversaries were twice or more than twice the number of companions, then none of the player heroes would be able to choose a rearward stance. But since they're evenly matched, two of the player heroes are going to come to a close combat stance, and one of them can stay back in a rearward stance if they'd like. So I've made these coasters to kind of illustrate that. So we'll say the player hero number 1 at the top of the round chooses a forward stance, so he comes into this engagement circle. Player hero number 2 says, I want to be a little more guarded in my attitude, and I'm going to fight an open stance, so he comes into his engagement circle there. But player hero number 3 says, I'm going to stand back and fire with my bow, so I'm going to stay in the rearward stance and be there. Well, since the number of player heroes equals the number of adversaries, the player heroes get to decide the engagements. So player hero number 1 says, hey, I'm going to engage this orc soldier. Player hero number 2 says, you know what, I really want to fight this orc guard or this orc, this great orc to kind of take care of him. And that leaves one unengaged adversary left, and the lore master gets to decide what to do with this particular character. So this character can stay back and rearward and just fire this at any of the player heroes he wants to, or the lore master can say, you know what, I want this one to join this particular engagement circle, engage player hero number 1. And so in this scenario, then we would play that out in the round. If the player heroes had the initiative, then they would attack first, and player hero number 1 could since he's in forward, he'd go first in the order of combat, and he would get to attack either adversary 14 or 13, and then it would go to player hero number 2 because he is in open position in the second spot in the order, and he would get to attack adversary number 15, this great orc, and then it would go to player hero number 3 in rearward position, and he would get to fire at either 14, 13, or 15, whatever target he would like to fire at. Okay, so let's change this up just a little bit. We'll take these stances out, and we're going to put these back here, and we're just going to do one other situation just so we can see what would happen. What if we added another adversary into this equation? because this would change up the way that we do the engagement slightly, because now the player heroes would not be choosing the engagement. It would be the lore master who would now choose the engagement. So the first thing that must happen is that the player heroes still get to decide their stances at the top of the round. So in this case, let's say that player hero number 1 says, I want to fight forward. Player hero number 2 says, I want to fight in open. And since there's 2 in a close combat situation, and there's not more than double the number of companions in adversaries, then player hero number 3 still says, I'm going to stay in the rearward position because I got 2 people in a close combat position in front of me. Okay, but the difference now is that the lore master is going to choose the engagements rather than the player heroes. So remember that great orc number 15? Well, number 2 really wanted to attack this one, but the lore master says no. The great orc is going to go after number 1. Okay, and then number 14 is going to go after number 2. Number 13 is going to go after number 2. And you know what? We're going to leave number 16 back here in rearward to just fire. And so that's an example of how to do an engagement. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you have any questions, you can find me on the Cubicle 7 forum. My name is James R. Brown. And if you need any clarifications at all, you can look at the course supplement, pages 174 and 175. And it talks about everything that I mentioned today. All right, thanks.